Hi, good afternoon. It's Dr. B, just about 1:45 on a Saturday afternoon. Um, Feeling better. For those of you who have seen the email I sent out a couple of days ago that I was uh, going through some doctor tests. I'm still going through some doctor tests and so forth. That kind of laid me low. I think you can hear it in my voice, but that's the least of what's going on right now. Uh, and so this video that should have been out probably 3 or 4 days ago, I finally felt the strength to do today. So we're going to do that today. I want to emphasize to you that this is the second video of the past week. All right, the second video of the past week. The agenda for the coming week will be up tomorrow, and an introductory video for that material will be up tomorrow as well. Probably two videos in all, but we'll just do one for tomorrow, one for tomorrow for the coming week. This is the culmination of the previous week when I was not myself. If you could tell the difference between not myself and myself, there's a dissertation in that, I suppose. Just to remind you what was in the previous week, there was a pretty important discussion question that is due to, I think, the 16th. You need to pay careful attention to that, and as well as a journal assignment. And what I'm trying to do is begin in a different way now, a bit to build you towards that end of the semester assignment. So I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow, but it's going to be more of a matter of breaking it into chunks now. We've done the overall piece 2 or 3 times now. Now we'll break it into chunks. And if you work with me, you will see that you will work with me. You're all great students. What you'll do is we'll move you along so you can piece these premises together into a whole with a W. And then you'll have not only have a pretty good assignment done, but more importantly, have muscles that will enable you to be an administrator with skills that most administrators don't have. He smiled smugly. Believe it or not, for numbers of reasons. So that goes with that. So again, tomorrow's video, assuming I get to it tomorrow, pretty sure I can, will enable you to begin to do that, engage that part of the process. But this is really the culmination of the previous week, where I had gone through a host of material and expectations and spent a considerable amount of time on the action plan. And I thought I'd back off from that a little bit, and we'll go back more thoroughly, more purposefully from this point forward, quite frankly, to the end of the semester, in trying to weld my ideas with your ideas, with those of 3 respected authors, and in no particular order, Dr. Koza, Drs. Fullen and Hargraves, and Dr. Tomlinson. They all travel with the same sets of points of view for the most part. And along the way, I'll just try to comment towards them. If I see any other materials or know of any other materials that I think you should be paying attention to, I could really think of one that I'll post up for next week, not for this week. We can go from there. So I'm going to begin with Dr. Koza's chapter 3. Next week, we'll be doing chapter 4. That will be tomorrow, or hopefully tomorrow, where Dr. Koza talks about something called a community of learners. Now, don't listen to the tone of my voice as if I'm being negative/pessimistic about it or skeptical about it. Not at all. What troubles me is that the words are used too often. Those kinds of things that you hear so often that you kind of, as my wife says sometimes about my children, that they become mother deaf. They don't particularly hear them anymore because we say them so often. Which follows to the next point about which most of this chapter is about, and the concept of culture. Culture with a small c. In a program like this, where you're in the Project Leader program, and again, I'll remind you that next Saturday is the meeting at Wading River. Please help me understand what you were able to do to encourage other people to attend that meeting in one form or another, because that will be part of your administrative internship hours we can sign off on if you were able to do that. If you were not, you're going to have to do the parent engagement assignment, which I'll talk about in a week or two. Anyway, the community of learners is what it sounds like. It's a community of people who care about it. I'm going to give you a quick personal example. have a grandson who's just going to be 18 in a couple of weeks. Not a great student in America, adequate student, not particularly invested in schooling all that much. I'm laughing, but it hasn't always been funny. At any rate, about 2 years ago, he discovered acting and singing and dancing and drama out of nowhere. We had none of us had a clue that he had any kind of interest in or skills and slash talent for. Well, it turns out this kid is a budding star. He's been in any number of community productions the last 2 years, especially this past year, and been hunted down by colleges to apply for his school, even though his grades aren't all that good. Certainly, when he auditions for these schools, they're not looking for grades so much, quite frankly, as they're looking for talent, and that he's got. And so he's been accepted to any number of places. Now, parenthetically, at the same time, simultaneously, I'm not sure exactly why he did. I think his mother encouraged him to try out for the junior fire department in the local community where we live out here in Suffolk County. And talk about, the proverbial duck to water. He took to this whole idea of fire department science, if you want to call it that, skill sets, competencies, unbelievably. And on top of that, the fire department has taken to him. They love the kid. They've offered him scholarships to go to college, 2-year colleges for fire department science, or something. I think that's the title of the degree. They really want to help him become a fireman. Now, he's not yet 18, and for those of you who don't live in the city, you may not know. We didn't know that you have to be 21 to be in the New York City Fire Department, which pays, as it's an occupation, obviously, and well-respected one from every source you can think of. For him to be qualified to go to try to enter the fire department in New York City. And that's 3 years down the road. Well, the short story is he's much more interested in becoming a fireman than he is in becoming an actor. And his opinion about this is really interesting, and you have to respect it. He said to his mother and to his grandma, not to me, otherwise I haven't really pushed him too hard because I can get too aggressive. So I sit back when I have enough brains to sit back. And he said to his grandmother, they really like me. They really appreciate me. They're very good to me, the fire department. And I feel like I'm part of them. Now, I'm going to give you the fancy word. He feels affiliated. He's part of the community, the part of the fraternity, if you want to use that term. And now, if you think about it, there's plenty of occupations or, what's the other word? Interests, hobbies, I'm not sure if that's the right word, where people become so interested in something that they find a club, or they find or a baseball team or athletic team, and they become so enamored of that and so connected to it that it's very, very, very compelling. Hard to give up. The flip of that, heaven forbid, if I can be so editorializing, would be cults. Those people are affiliated to each other, whether we like it or not. All right. And at any rate, and you know what cults is, all kinds of cults to talk about as far as that's concerned. So the kid's torn, and part of us is leaning on him to go to school at least for a while and see if he likes the drama part. Well, the other part is to go become a fireman, take the courses at Suffolk Community, and then graduate with that. And then I won't give you the whole trail, but eventually we'll try to get into the New York City Fire Department. Again, you can't be much more noble than that as far as the respect that piece is obvious to anyone. Now, the other part of it, I forgot to say before, was that he doesn't think he wants to do the drama thing because already at 17 plus, he sees the competition as cutthroat. The people are not teamed up, unless maybe when they're in the cast of a show. Other than that, they're cutting each other's throats in order to get the parts that they want to advance themselves. Apparently not the case at all in the fire department or that kind of occupation. So one can understand why he feels the way he feels. people are talking now about community. In this case, it's a community of learners where the leader, in your case, the project leaders, building leader people you aspire to be, or department chair, along the same lines, are you really trying to create communities of learners? That is to say, people who are truly connected to each other with a shared vision, to go back to Senge's words, to work with each other, to assure themselves that they can come up with ways to best meet the needs of the students whom they serve. Community of learners. Now, every school claims to have professional learning communities. I'm not going to give you I have an opinion, but I'm not going to give you any research based on this. But I will say that my experience is that most say that they have it, but they really don't. They may have little committees that meet about, decorating the faculty room and things like that. But as far as truly getting their fingernails dirty and the issues that they need to spend attention to, it's very difficult for them, because a lot of times the leaders don't make it easy there. Well, even though they may talk the talk, they may not be able to walk it. Now, to come back to Dr. Koza's point, in her chapter, when she talks about the global community, the multi-age community approach, it's not easy to do, because now it's even more complex with multi-age grade level complexion of the classrooms. And I just want to make that point, because you need to be tuned into that. I can't give you a recipe, nor can Dr. Koza, or Fullen or Tomlinson give you a recipe. Do this, take 3 tablespoons of that, go to bed and take 2 more tablespoons of this. It doesn't work that way. The analogy I will use, it would be more nearly like a jazz ensemble than a concert with a music conductor, where the music conductor knows when the trombones are supposed to play versus when the strings are supposed to play, and how they're supposed to play together when and where. They can bring a whole composition together. In contrast, a jazz ensemble kind of plays off itself. They listen to each other. They independently try to find things to organically find each other. That's a much more difficult thing to bring together. And to come back to one more analogy, there are some baseball teams that have won World Series where most of the players couldn't stand each other and would have fights in the dugout and in the clubhouse. But any championship team, whether it be the Little League team you're familiar with, or the Super Bowl champs, or whomever, are generally very affiliated with each other, very connected with each other, because the coaches found ways for them to support each other and help each other get better at what they do. So all those analogies come together, and maybe even more so when we consider how Dr. Koza is advocating a multi-age classroom, and the fact that you've got to build a trusting and caring school environment. Now, some of that I think we've already spoken about, but when we talk about building a new culture, we're talking about the small C. We are not talking about culture as in cultural differences, as multicultural. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the culture of an organization. In our case, the culture of a school, or the culture of a program, as you may be leading. That's a different ball game. Now, as far as culture is concerned, I always use Edgar Schein. I'm going to post a video up about Schein. I may have even done this earlier. I'll just repost it then. But Schein talks about culture is really about peeling back the reasons why people do what they do in a given group. Think about any group you've joined or have been assigned to, whether it be a committee or to a school job, or any job you may have had, or even your own family. They all have cultures. They all do certain things. And they do them so often and with such a regularity, and sometimes with such attention, that they don't think about why they did what they did, why it came about the way that it did. So that's the kind of culture we're talking about now. But Schein would talk to you about, and I'm going to give you a backward analogy of this in a minute. Schein has broken down the premise of organization. Edgar Schein, Chein, has broken down the levels of culture into 3 parts. And think of it as a triangle. The top of the triangle being artifacts, the middle of the triangle being values and priorities. And the bottom of the triangle, the base of the triangle upon which the other two reside, is our basic assumptions and beliefs. What's underneath, what's under the water, what's the bottom of the iceberg, not the top. Now, to go back to the top for a moment, the artifacts represent things that people can concretely recognize that metaphorically represent something else. Now, here's a great example. I hope I didn't belabor this with you another time. Sometimes I forget which class I'm speaking to. I was doing a futuring project with a school district out east, way out east. Those of you who live in the city, you may never have heard of it. Way out east on Long Island, off Long Island, actually, a little island called Fisher's Island. It's out off the North Fork of Long Island. It's actually closer to Rhode Island than it is to New York. However, it's considered the last district, Eastern District, in New York State. It's governed by New York State commissioners, regulations, and so forth. The whole district, maybe 120 kids, 130. All right. The island is owned for the most part by billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires. And there's a chunk of population who live there year round. The billionaires only live there in the good months, the better weather months. However, the other residents, the permanent residents, are the servants of the billionaires. They cut the grass, they cook the food, keep the places clean, and provide various services to the wealthy who live there temporarily. And it's been like that for a couple of hundred years, well, maybe 150. So the 120 students who attend Fisher's Island School District all are in one building, K-12. I think there were 6 kids in the senior class when I got there to do a consult there. Now, what's interesting is I sent an email to the staff with the superintendent's permission a couple of weeks before I showed up. By the way, it was 2 ferries to get there. I was seasick half the time. And what I did was I asked them to bring in a physical artifact that represents what they think represents, metaphorically or analogically, if you want, what the culture of their district was. And when I got there, everybody had something. One guy brought in an apple, somebody else brought in a memo from this principal, someone brought in pictures of students, of bulletin boards, the typical artifacts, I ordinarily see when I do this exercise, which, by the way, I took from Schein. Schein, by the way, was not an educational culturist. He was an organizational one, but there is no difference between the schools or organizations. One guy brings in a lobster on a leash, a live lobster. Now, you may wonder why he brought a lobster in. We'll get to that in a minute, but you also need to know that the lobster is probably 6 feet long and alive. Don't ask me how he kept it alive, but the story was that he captured the lobster off the shore of Fisher's Island. It's an island. He was scuba diving down there, and somehow he captured this 6-foot lobster and brought it home. It's kind of a pet, I guess. Everything I know about it, I just told you. And we spent 3 hours trying to figure out what that represented. And I wish I had you in front of me so we could have some fun with this. But the short story was, to cut to the chase, we figured out, and that's what he was driving at very admirably, that Fisher's Island is an island. Hello? Its whole status, everything about that school district is about the fact that it is on an island that serves rich people. Fisher's Island is an island, and you didn't know this until I told you, where most of the students who graduate from there, many of the students will typically go to the mainland to go to school. Some of them will. They almost always come back. Not that they're not prepared to go to college or hold a job down in Connecticut or wherever they may go to, so much as they just prefer their culture. They don't want to leave. So what they do is they become The sons of gardeners have become the gardeners. The daughters of gardeners have become gardeners, and so forth. Fisher's Island is an island, and the students lived on an island that wanted to perpetuate its island mentality, its island's basic beliefs and assumptions. I take that another step further, and I don't mean to sound negative about it. Really, a very nice place when I was there was that they all, the school totally unanimously believed they had the obligation to have their students graduate with a good, solid high school diploma. And that was about it, though. I mean, it wasn't as though they really necessarily thought they were preparing kids for career and technical education programs across the Great Sea over to Rhode Island or to Connecticut. That's about culture. I was in another school district. I just thought of this a couple of years ago. Totally diverse. It wasn't diverse because it was all diverse. A very, very poor place in comparison to Fisher's Island, extremely poor. So I started to do a presentation. I was sitting next to a man who leaned over to me. And I will say this in case I don't mean to offend anybody by pointing this out, but here it comes. He was white, and the school district was not white. And he leaned over to me and whispered to me, he says, "You know where you are." So my being sometimes kind of dense, I said, "Yeah, I'm in the library." He says, "You know where you are." So I said it again, "No, I'm in the library." Then I realized what he was saying. He says, "No, you know where you are." And I'm not going to mention the district, but that's what he wanted me. That's what he was trying to tell me. So I got it. And I got, not that I'm Mr. All that sensitive all the time. I turned around to him and said, "What do you mean by that?" And he got very embarrassed. Because it wasn't that kind of console, by the way. It was about something much more mundane than where he had led me. And I said, "I don't know what you mean by that." I did know what he meant by it. The expectation of this place was not going to be high because of the capacity of the students to achieve well. Because of the educational system's deficits. Another example, this is one man's example, it's not the school's example. Certainly not that. I don't want to pretend that it was everybody's point of view, it's this one person's. His basic beliefs about that place and how it drove him or didn't drive him to be whatever kind of teacher he was. And I'm going to go out on a limb, although I don't know this, that he was probably not a great teacher. So we come back to the Coase's chapter here. When you're going to build a new culture, the first thing you have to do is break it down. Every job, by the way, this is one of my students just called me about a month ago. He's got a principal's job upstate. And I said to him, "Remember what I told you, David?" And he said, "Yeah, I know." The first thing they asked me was, how would I get change thing? And the first thing I told them was what you told me. So I have to understand the culture. We have to understand the culture. If the basic assumptions and beliefs are alien, or not aligned with what should be, then we have to work on that first. Can't go any further than that. Can't go any further than that. And the words that Dr. Coase uses, I think she gets this from Ricky Dufour, but it's valuable anyway, with a shared sense of purpose. Goes on to talk about mission and vision statements. I could do 3 courses on that for you if you wanted me to. Maybe I'll come back to I will come back to that actually in a couple of weeks. Okay. It's not as though you snap your finger and say, "Let's write a vision statement before we go home today." That's nonsense. It takes a long time to evolve towards a true vision as such. Dufour / Coase also speak about teacher involvement in decision-making. Take your own pulse for a moment. To what extent, rhetorical question, to what extent are you permitted to have a role in the decision-making process of the school? That's all about culture. All about culture. And again, I got 100 stories about that, but won't bore you with that. So the good principle, among other things, and especially in terms of the Dr. Coase's book, speak really about beginning to teach your stakeholders, your teachers, how to share decisions with you. Now, I'm being very general. I'm not giving every detail about this because there are many buts to this. But in the broad terms, according to how we see Koz's book, I get small groups, I put them together, give them the chances to trust each other, to trust me, in order to begin to exchange and evolve creative thinking, in order to come up with decisions that truly meet the needs of what we're talking about. Now, the video you're going to see tomorrow, for example, is totally tuned into this premise, because the discussion question for next week, not for this week, the discussion question for next week will be about you're identifying the culture to some extent, about how things happen in the schools in which you work. If it's I'm the boss and I tell you what to do all the time kind of place. By the way, that can be effective sometimes in certain circumstances, short term, but it's not going to build the muscles that the stakeholders all need, he shouted, in order to bring it to a radical change like Dr. Koz is advocating. Now, there's one case study I wanted to speak to for, let me find it. I sat on a board in a charter school for about 2 minutes before I quit. I should have realized I shouldn't have said yes in the first place, where they were trying to decide to whether they should fire 2 teachers. Now, understand, and some of you know more than others, that there is no tenure in a charter school. And the principal wanted to fire 2 teachers. One of the teachers was a veteran teacher there, and one was a brand new teacher. The first teacher, the veteran, had supposedly been bad-mouthing the school around the area. And it got back to the principal, and that's why she was going to get fired. Think about that. The second principal, teacher, brand new, and needed help. I asked to see an observation of the teacher, and the principal only had one. That one observation, that one basis, he was going to be fired. I looked at the observation and I said to the principal, in a court of law, we laughed out of court on this one observation. It was practically written on the back of an envelope, but said nothing, let alone how for this person could improve our instructional talents. So I voted no on both cases. I forgot to say that we argued about this for a couple of hours. And then finally, when one of the fellow board members, hit a hand on the desk and says, "What are their scores?" And the principal very quickly knew the answer to that and said, both of them were a little bit below everybody else's. And that was enough. Basically, it was, if you ever saw Alice in Wonderland, was off with their heads. And that's when my stomach turned and said, I think I won't be here for much longer. But that's an example of a culture that's alien to growing people to become the kind of effective people they can be in any kind of form, whether it be a multi-age school or any kind of school. Now, again, we all know that charter schools don't have tenure. I'm not going to go into that today. I have mixed feelings about that. I'm not going to go into it. But this whole chapter really kind of devotes itself to what that looks like. It does a nice job with it on a snapshot of a typical day for students. That's a great section that Barbara leans into. So with that, let's see if we can melt that with Fuller and Hargreaves. That chapter is chapter 6, and it's the same thing. Oh my, look at that, how smart he is. He found chapter 3 to match with chapter 6. It's the same premise. Okay. Professional culture and communities. Hello. Capacity. Hello. Capital. And I'll read you the definition of culture that Fuller offers. I leave Hargreaves out sometimes. I feel badly about that because they co-wrote the book. And Fuller offers, the culture is the difference between having bacon and fruit on the same plate in America. And regarding this is almost unthinkable in Britain. Culture is about what goes together and what should be kept apart. And often, like bacon and fruit, these distinctions are traditional, unquestioned, and arbitrary. Our first visit to Italy, I went to tip a waiter, and he gave me kind of a look. He took what I offered him. I will remember that. But the travel guy said, you really shouldn't be tipping people. They don't like to be, they don't think they should be tipped. They think it's part of what they're supposed to be doing as their profession. I didn't know that, and I didn't do it anymore after that. Another thing I learned about bacon and fruit was that Italians don't eat breakfast like we eat breakfast. They don't want their Wheaties and bananas and maybe a couple of scrambled eggs on the side. They like something sweet in the morning, which if I stood up, you would see that I do like a lot of sweet things. But in the end, it's about they have a whole different kind of breakfast than we have. It's Italian culture. So, I mean, I think you get in that because when we allow culture to be arbitrary, we're talking about the fact that Fulton points out that it's a curse and it's a blessing. Sometimes it's a blessing if the assumptions and beliefs deep down underneath are solid and devoted to the needs of children instead of the needs of the stakeholders sometimes. That says, well, if it's something that's much deeper and more malicious, it's got to be unearthed and exposed to the air, hoping that it will rot away that way when people see it, recognize it, and are able to talk about it. Or, believe it or not, even turn what is rotten into something that's productive for the nurturing of the growth of everybody, as I switch metaphors, to turning it into compost, which is usually a good thing for nurturing a garden, for example. And so Fulton and Hargreaves go really speak to the same premises that we spoke about there. They honor the premise of individualism, right? And that makes some sense too. I think sometimes I fall into this trap as a professor and as a leader of programs that sometimes I kind of want to put a cookie cutter over everybody, so everybody does pretty much the same thing, and that's not necessarily a healthy thing to do. You have to give teachers a chance to be individual. I'll give you a quick example. The Bernardo War story. I had a computer committee when I was principal quite a few years ago now. And a great computer teacher. We had some computer issues way back in terms of when technology was beginning to embed itself or be embedded into a school system. And one thing we began to do at that point, I'm not even proud of it in a certain sense, was we took each grade level. I assigned teachers to work up what they thought a good piece of software might be for that grade level, and then a second grade and the third grade and so forth. We tried to align it with the different emphases of the curriculum across the board. So for fourth grade being in the social studies, the emphasis of the beginning of really looking at American history on a low level, insofar as New York State history is concerned, and community. I didn't do it, but the committee I had identified something called Timeliner. You probably don't even remember what it is, but in those days it was there were matrix printers. And so the paper wasn't stacked on top of each other. It was kind of attached to itself with little spindles, little holes for the spindles to move the paper through. So you can make these really big, long, horizontal things with the computer. And there was one program called Timeliner, very well-known program at the time, and very effective, where a child, a student, with the teacher's help, could make a timeline of something. So, which came first, Columbus or Vasco da Gama, I don't know, whatever it was that they wanted to do. So I kind of stood up in front of the group and a faculty meeting. I said, well, here are the grade levels, and here's what we're doing in fourth grade. And probably my best teacher in the whole building, certainly one of them, was doing one of these. And I knew she was not happy, and she was generally always happy. So I waited until the meeting was over, and I pulled her aside. I said, Pam, I'm not happy. What's happening here? She says, can we talk? I said, of course. We go into my office. And she was not happy with me. All right. And she said to me, I've been teaching a long time. I said, okay. I'm ready for that one, usually when I hear it. I said, if you're telling me because you're the principal, I must use Timeliner instead of teaching timelines time in chronology, which is a tough skill to teach 8-year-olds. The ways I've been using it very effectively. I'll do it because you're the principal. But if you're telling me to do it because you're telling me to do it and I must do this, it's because you told me to do it. That's essentially what you said. I'll follow orders. So to my credit, I'm smiling because I didn't always say the right thing, but this time I did. I said, Pam, totally respect everything you think and say all the time. I said, here's where we're coming from. All I'm asking from you is that you give it a try. I'll give you some help. I'll get one of my specialists to come in and show you how it works. And if I'd like for you to try to do that. If it doesn't work, come back to me and say it doesn't work. I'm going back to what I did. I'm going to respect that. Because in the end, we both agree with the same thing. We want students to have time and chronology skills. She stood up. She says, okay. So I'll give it a fair shot. And I knew that she would. A couple of weeks later, she comes back and says, nope, it's cute. I'll use it as a supplement, but nope, I'm going to do my way. And she had this whole system that she had set up. So I saluted her and I said, Pam, go for it. She had the right to be an individual as long as she wasn't being an individual that's going to hurt students. I can't argue that point. That's the trouble sometimes with culture. So always bear that in the back of your mind. Now, a flip of that is in that same grade, I had a parent come to me and say, I want to move my child from Mrs. Smith to Mrs. Jones. So I never did that for numbers of reasons, unless it was a real serious issue. So I said, what's that about? She said, well, Mrs. Jones doesn't use the computers in her classroom. That this gathering does. Mrs. Smith, I may have my names mixed up, said, but she does. She uses it extensively. My child's into computers. I want my child in another building, in another classroom. So in the end, I said no, because I didn't want people voting with their feet every time they thought and one teacher was doing something that was better than the other teacher, because every teacher has their strengths and does things that appeal to students at different times of the year. But it was a dilemma for me as a principal, because what I needed, talking about individualism, I needed everybody to be using technology because it was the coming thing, because the technology we were identifying had value. It wasn't like, we were playing Mario Brothers things. These were all things aligned with curriculum. And so it really wasn't fair to the child to be in classroom A. Well, meanwhile, the teacher that didn't do the computers used to take the students on a week-long camping trip. Talk about 8-year-olds out to a Girl Scout camp out way out east in Long Island. They did all kinds of outdoor education things. They slept there with, the parents came out and stayed with them. It was a wonderful experience. Something they pointed to for the whole year. The other teacher didn't do that. So what do? You begin to flip teachers around. That causes inconsistency of expectation. That's something you have to pay attention to. So the Fulham chapter, I argues for some factors that you need to pay attention to. I won't go into them. You can read that yourself if you haven't already. But in the end, we're talking about collaborative cultures. I may have used this phrase with you before. None of us is as smart as all of us. It's an old Japanese business saying, and it sounds very cute. And on surface, everyone kind of says, yeah, when a group is better suited to make a decision or realize things than the individuals are. But that isn't always true, especially in school systems, believe it or not. Everybody has master's degrees and thinks they have the answer to everybody's prayers all the time. And you've been all in groups, put 5 teachers in a room and ask them if this is a blue pencil or a green one. I don't even know the answer to that. And you're going to get 5 different responses. 5 different, I think, and without even listening to what the other person may be actually sharing out. So it isn't true that collaborative cultures are something you just snap your finger at, and it will happen. It's got to be built in and nurtured. All right, and we've talked about that already, and I'll come back to that when we get more deeply into the action plan, where you need to make sure that, I'm pointing at you as if you can see me, you have to make sure that the factors of high engagement in a group are all there. If they're not all there, then it's not going to happen. And then you add in the other cross impact of that, which would be Lencioni's five dysfunctions of a team, which begins with trust. And we'll come back to that in a couple of weeks. So yeah, collaborative culture, of course, a good collaborative culture works well when you understand the difference between collaborative and cooperative. Cooperative is different than collaborative. Break down the word collaborative, co, together, or with, labor, work with. When I work with you to co-create something, that's collaboration. If it's, okay, you go off in the corner and you make the pencil, and I'll go over in the corner and I'll make the picture and you color it, and then I'll color it and you color it. That is not collaboration, that's cooperation. And you got to keep your ears to the ground on whether that's what's going on in your own building. He also talks about something called balkanization, and that's because I'm old and was a history teacher at one time. Balkanization is a phrase that speaks about splitting up countries so that they're so intense on keeping their own strengths that they're willing to compete with another one to make sure they don't get those same strengths. It's not a healthy thing for a school to do, and you can't permit that really. Again, you can honor people's differences, but you always have to have them help them come up with ways to collaborate. You have to insist on that if they haven't figured that out on their own. And again, I think that there's some nice explanations of that in this chapter 6 that Fullenhoff is up. He also talks about something called contrived collegiality. I'm smiling because you get some of that. Let's do an icebreaker. And people sort of ha-ha at each other, but they're not particularly interested necessarily in hearing each other and trying to, here's a fancy word, but you know what it means, synthesize and empower each other. There's even a better word. And so there's ways to do this. And the first one starts with coaching. You can have an outside observer, the principal or someone else come in and watch how people work together, find ways that work well, identify them, identify things that they might want to co-consider, there's that co-word again, to work on, and then build it into the conversation. So they learn how to share their ideas and co-create as such. And sometimes peer pressure, I don't like peer pressure all that much because peer pressure is what it sounds like. It's not always fair. And it's could be very destructive if you let it take too much of its power over what's going on. So I would keep a break on that one pretty closely. Planning time is a big premise. Planning time is how you ask people to share instructional practices and co-develop premises, and then do you give them the time to do it? That isn't fair. Now, there's a lot of research to show that professional development, whether it's your multi-age classroom or whether it be a more traditional approach, has to build time into the day, he shouted, to plan together. And my fingers crossed, I don't want to forget what I meant by that. Build time into the day to plan together. You'd be surprised if people complain about that sometimes, but in the end, you need to build in, for example, prep time or carve out a professional day for everyone to be together. If you wait to the end of the day, or if you start the day off with a faculty meeting, or whichever way, or whenever you run faculty meetings. By the way, most faculty meetings are a total waste of time because it's just about, administrative things that can be done on the memo. Instead, where one could develop faculty development and sharing, to use that word, much more preferably than to hear whether you have to stand on the side when the bell rings, kinds of things. Planning time. Now, one more war story. I did that in the building I took over. I planned out prep time for every grade level, and I had a meeting a week. No, not every week, but I think I had regularly scheduled meetings with each grade, have them work together. In the beginning, there was a lot of close. What are you talking about? We don't talk to each other. we don't really collaborate, or, even or share what we do. And it was so difficult for them. They just weren't used to it. Once they began to realize that they could get a lot of mileage out of some good ideas and learn from each other, it became glorious. Now, P.S., to come back to the culture work, the small C culture work, when I left that building, the new principal came in and immediately did away with planning with grade level times. It was a difficult thing to schedule, in truth, but she just took it out. Well, she really had a revolt on her hands, because in fact, they value that. It was a basic belief and assumption that they should be collaborating with each other. I'm smiling smugly, but I don't mean to be that. I felt badly for the new principal. I tried to tell the new principal this was important, but for some reason it didn't seem to be. I think she reversed the decision a little later. Okay. And which brings us back to professional communities. Where educators work, in continuing relationships and partnerships. Not just, by the way kinds of teams, but they really do sit down and plan things together. Let's do a science fair. Science fairs are kind of out of practice nowadays, but let's do a technology fair. You just don't do that singly. You have to do that in concert with other people. Let's teach each other things. Pam Kelly knows everything there is to know about Bloom's taxonomy. But Joe Smith never really gave it a lot of thought. So they get together and you have people take turns sharing some of their instructional practices. It's a nice way to see how things may begin to meld together. PLCs, he does a nice job with PLCs and the balance of that chapter, and I'm not going to beat it to death because you're probably getting tired of hearing me talk, and I'm getting tired of talking, in truth. But the conclusion actually section is really well done. Which brings us to Tomlinson. Now, Tomlinson is the caboose here, so I'm going to assume, as I'm pretty sure I'm correct, is that first I have to find the book. That's chapter 5. Oh, Tomlinson is actually a different topic altogether. Tomlinson is talking about effective teachers in Singapore. I'm not going to go into this specifically now. Maybe I'll pick it up another day. Essentially, we talked about Finland already and Ontario, because Ontario is full in, and Finland was the video I shared with you 2 weeks ago. Yeah, the other one is typically Shanghai is one that's not in this book or any of these books right now. It's typically recognized as a powerful, effective teaching structure is how they approach it in Singapore. I'm not going to read this to you. You can look at it yourself. But they do two things that Finland does. I will point that out. I don't know if they. I don't know if they. What's the word I'm looking for? Copied from Finland. I can't say one way or another on that, but certainly they have similar practices. Yeah. And the first practice, I'll give you two. First, and this really applies to your profession, to your action plan, and how you would work with your project, your E&L students as you begin to build a program, would be, it's easier said than done, would be that you're going to only take the top teachers. I'm smiling. Someone's going to kick me in the shin and say, well, what do you mean by top? And I'm smiling. I'm going to say, I'm not sure. But I will tell you that in Finland and in Singapore, I think I have told you already, not so true from Ontario, by the way, but in Finland and in Singapore, they only took the teacher candidates who were in the top 10% of their high school class. They were looking for the students, potential students who could be scientists, could be judges, could be doctors, medical doctors. Because they wanted smart people to win their schools. I'll tell you one fast story about that. I'm in the mood to tell war stories today. This is in contrast to the United States, where the United States takes teachers from the top 2/3. So I'm being a classist here. I apologize if it annoys any of you. When I graduated from high school, I was in the top 10%, but when I graduated from college, I was not in the top 10%, not at all. So I'm not sure how that all plays out. And I was a pretty good teacher up the road. But at any rate, the smarter the teachers, the better, more nearly they're going to know what to do and be able to create the things that need to be created. And extensive professional development, a different way to prepare teachers than we do in the United States. Much more experiential, much more like the Finland model. Close supervision, active supervision, modeling for their prospective teachers. And experiences in terms of analyzing every student's needs according to the conversations about what the data may suggest, qualitative or not. Now I'm going to be a sexist, but a reverse sexist for a moment. I'll end the class with this. Again, the building I took over a zillion years ago had a wonderful principal. He and I couldn't be more north and south about a lot of things, but I was a pretty good principal. He was a very good principal. I'm not going to say which one of us would be the one I would hire, but I would say he was certainly a well-respected principal. Very, very clear on supervising his teachers. Didn't give tenure to everybody. If you got tenure from Bob, you earned it, and that speaks well of him in an era where almost everybody got tenure, believe it or not. Very unilateral, as I've said to you before. It's his way, the highway. Was not particularly interested in what teachers thought, at least not formally, except for a small group of people whom he trusted. I was the opposite. I wanted input from the custodian, from the cafeteria person, if it had any relevance, and I felt we were all stronger for having done that. When he hired his people, he hired top-notch people. That's going to sound sexist, but no, all of you are too young to know what I'm driving at. So I'm just telling you, you can check with your parents if they remember these kinds of things, or grandparents, I guess, for that matter. And that is, we go after World War II. That's decades ago. I know I was born after World War II, but close to it as such. So you know where I'm placing this. The teachers I had in my building, female teachers in my building, were brilliant. They were scary, smart, well-read, articulate, dedicated, interested people in their craft. Brilliant people. Females. I had more males than most teachers and most of my colleagues, my principals. I'm not sure why that was the case, but I had some of the most brilliant people I've ever met were these female teachers. Were I a principal today, those same women were potential candidates from a position in a school I ran, I wouldn't have them. They would be judges. They would be presidents. They would be corporate leaders. They would be PhD candidates. There would be people who did not go into the profession because, as you know, this is nothing that you haven't heard someplace along the line. For the longest time, for pretty much all of our history, except perhaps the last 60 or 70 years, this month, obviously being Women's History Month, if I remember right. Post-World War II, women had three choices. So one of them kind of blended with the other, but really two choices. They could be a mom, or they could be a teacher, or they could be a nurse. Doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs? No way. That shift in society, which I applaud, where women have, I know it's not yet as equitable as it should be, where women have the opportunity, hopefully, to be anything they want to be. I have three daughters, and all three of them are educators, but it's not as though we said you have to be an educator. That's what they chose to be. That's different from him being kind of sidelined into different things like so. So there's a difference in the society now, which really means then that the people who decide to be teachers, whether they're male or female, I'm trying to be politically correct. I'm not sure how I should describe it any better than that. I apologize if I'm not. I really do. Is that now the burden falls on colleges, and the school districts that you work to develop you. Those of you who work in New York City, I'm going to shock you by telling you, in my mind, I grew up in New York City, but have professionally been a person out in boondocks, out in Suffolk County my whole career, except for when I could sew. Where I can tell you that, in my view, the New York City administrators and the New York City teachers get great professional development. They may not administer it correctly. They may not be introduced to them properly or embedded in what they do, but the quality of the PD that they get is very good in my experience. I'm not sure how that relates to all the things we're talking about today, but I think I've spent some good time with you kind of bolstering the premises of this. And then wherever you can take it over towards your drafts of the action plan. Tomorrow's video, we'll talk more about how we're going to chunk that now. So don't go too far too quickly until you listen to tomorrow's video. So I will get that done somewhere tomorrow morning, I hope. Take care.